Hello again! It's been half a year since the last video was published on this channel, so I feel I owe you an explanation. I haven't disappeared or abandoned this project. In fact, I've been working hard on it all this time, and I've posted a detailed update in my blog every single week. But if I'm honest, I was a little disheartened. My attempts to promote the project haven't seen much success yet. I've posted extensively on Reddit, but it takes a lot of time and hasn't yielded the results I'd hoped for. So then I set myself a new goal, to reach a public demo version as quickly as possible and focus solely on development. And let me tell you, a lot has been accomplished since then. The latest milestone was dedicated to functions. Previously, we could add functions to individual objects. For example, I could make it so that leaves could be collected from this bush. Additionally, I could set it up so collecting leaves from this bush triggers the start of a quest. That's how functions were set up. But what if I want to create 10 or even 100 of these bushes? Would I have to manually recreate the functions for every single one? No. Prefabs are here to save the day. In the Bio tab, there's now an option to save an object as a prefab. This saves all its associated functions, name and description. You can even add a useful note for your future self. Now when I open the spawn window, a symbol appears above the model, indicating that there are prefabs available. A separate list displays all possible prefabs for that model. With this, I can now create as many identical bushes as I want, and all of them will have the required functions. Here's how I think my quest should work. The player gathers 10 leaves and takes them to a biologist for analysis. The biologist reveals that the bushes are corrupted and assigns a new quest. To make this quest chain work, I've added a couple of new conditions: quest completion and active quest. By simply adding an unlock condition to the new quest, I've created the very first quest chain. Moving on, the biologist assigns a new quest to find corrupted bushes. I now need to identify which bushes are corrupted and which are not. For this, I've created a new function to gather corrupted leaves, which is only accessible while the quest is active. Then I made another prefab. Now there are 2 prefabs in the list, which means I can select the bushes I need and replace one prefab with another in just 2 clicks. Additionally, I can attach both prefabs, or even 10, to a single object, enhancing its modular functionality. Perhaps you've noticed that the biologist is currently represented by a building. Well, that's fine for now, we'll eventually need NPCs, right? The Monsters tab has been renamed to Characters, because let's philosophize for a moment. What separates a monster from an NPC? Usually, it's hostility to the player. However, guards from one faction might be hostile to another faction. And in games, we often encounter monstrous creatures that speak to players and assign quests, don't we? I've marked characters friendly to at least one faction in green and those hostile to everyone in red. Most importantly, characters can now have functions too. Let's spawn a few characters. Here, on the redesigned spawn window, you can now spawn multiple characters at once or switch to a mode for fine-tuning each character's position. Furthermore, by selecting existing characters, you can now edit their level, position and aggression zones. Now let's transfer the function from the building to our biologist. For this, we'll use the function presets I've implemented. Any function can be turned into a preset by clicking this button. This allows you to save a function as a template that can be applied to any object. With that done, I can safely remove the function from the building and assign it to the biologist. Actually, I want there to be 2 biologists, so the player can go to either one. I'll assign the function to both. But where exactly should the player take the corrupted grass? Let's look more closely at the Bring Items tab. I've added several targeting modes for all interactions. In Function Source mode, the player must return the items to the same biologist who gave the quest. In any Function Source mode, they can return them to any biologist. Of course, you can also designate a specific target, like the building, so that all items are delivered there regardless of who gave the quest. all these prefabs and function presets need to be stored somewhere, which brings us to the new prefab database window. Here, as expected, you can edit, delete or create new prefabs. Each prefab also shows how many objects are linked to it and how many are not. With one click, you can link or unlink all objects in the world that shares this model. Oh, and you can also change the icon color for better visibility, I guess. Since I'm happy with the quests now, it's time to think about the players. The prefab database includes 2 pre-created prefabs with 2 new functions, spawn points and respawn points. These prefabs allow any player to spawn or respawn without restrictions, which is the bare minimum for early gameplay. But what if I want to create rival player factions? Naturally, I'd need to configure where each faction can spawn, and now I can. For example, I've created a Dark Souls style campfire as a spawn point for new players. In the effects section, I can specify a dialogue that's shown to players when they first join the game. This will be especially useful when you can play as your own characters in the future. Conditions can also be set, such as which faction or classes can spawn there. I've even added a gender condition because why not? While the spawn function is straightforward, the respawn function is more complex. By default, it has no restrictions, but that's usually not ideal. Most of the time we need to define a respawn zone. For this, the behavior block includes an action zone option. What if players must first unlock the checkpoint before respawning there? There are 2 solutions for this. The first is an auto-activation zone, where players need to enter the area to activate the respawn point. The second is manual activation, requiring players to interact with the point before it becomes usable. And manual activation can even have a cost. Respawn points support all the same conditions as spawn points. There are also some specific options worth noting. In the effects section, you can override the percentage of experience lost upon respawning in PvE or PvP scenarios. You can also override health and mana values. You might want players to respawn with full health in a battleground instead of the default 25%. Finally, you can override minimal delay after death before players are allowed to respawn there. Did you notice how I said override 3 times? That's because the game now has a game design window for defining your game's core parameters. It will include multiple tabs, and 4 are already available. The first tab focuses on death and respawn mechanics, letting you set default respawn delays, default experience lost and health mana percentage, and whether level loss is globally allowed upon death. Let's take a quick look at the other tabs while we're here. The character rarity tab lets you create rarity types and assign bonus modifiers. By default, I've included common rarity, enhanced rarity for tougher enemies, elite rarity for group-focused enemies, and legendary rarity for raid bosses. The levels and experience tab has been highly anticipated, and now it's here. It lets you set the maximum level for all characters and configure the exact amount of experience needed for each level. The tab includes various display modes for easier navigation, and you can also use group editing with 6 different algorithms to shape the level table however you like. Finally, the Experience from Characters tab solves the tedious balancing issue, calculating the experience awarded for killing monsters. Now, instead of manually assigning values, you can specify how many monsters a players need to kill to level up. The system calculates the average experience per kill for you. And of course, you still can adjust this manually for weaker or stronger enemies. Feeling tired yet? Believe it or not, they are just the most significant changes. I've also redesigned the debug menu, and now it's possible to spawn players' exact faction and class you need. I've added main quest type that stand out on the journal and have a boosted priority. I've implemented a save manager for multiple save files. I've introduced random object spawning from a selected pool. I've created a dependency screen to track objects usage, and much more. The changes are extensive, but it's time to wrap things up. Oh, and I almost forgot. Back in September, I launched a version for my Patreon supporters on Steam. No more file sharing services. Each supporter received a permanent Steam key that will remain valid even for the game's release version. And if you want to play right now, you can do it on Steam too by supporting me on Patreon. For just $10, you'll gain access to a game that will cost more at launch. Plus, your support really goes straight into development. Thanks to my supporters, I've been able to purchase asset packs that will soon be implemented in the game. This milestone is officially complete. The next one will kick off with a major content drop. After that, I'll finally add non-humanoid characters. Then, I'll focus on developing the in-game economy, including the auction house and vendors. Once the economy's foundation is in place, I'll shift my attention to player types, adding traits and behavioral differences. By the end of the milestone, players should feel like real, living persons. That's the goal. And that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on future progress. Follow my blog for weekly updates and make sure to wishlist the game on Steam. Thank you so much for your encouragement and feedback. Let's make this year incredible. Happy New Year!